Whatever is happening to me, pray it doesn't happen to you. This began in a sunny place with warm weather. My good friend Owen had convinced me to travel with him while we were on break from school. He'd pitched it well enough. I'll cover lodging, it's a family cabin, you just have to pay your way there. Having been in my doctoral program for the better part of a decade now, there hadn't been ample opportunities to treat myself. I was overdue an escape from my boring, bleary school. You know what? Sure, I told him. So there I was, waist deep in the murk. It was the middle of the trip. I raised a hand in return at Owen, who was on a bright orange kayak some 50 yards away, beckoning me forward. In truth, I had already started to have my fill of day drinking and watching people from the neighborhood lake houses tan. But I kicked myself for how fickle I was. Not a month earlier, and I'd been lamenting how I was wasting my youth on education. And already I was so eager to get back. Resolving to seize the day, I turned my afternoon wade into a swim. After a few minutes of sticking close to the shore, I decided to catch up to Owen. By then, his kayaking had brought him only a couple dozen feet from me. I started furiously paddling in his direction, ducking my head under to spring up at him from below and splash him. It was going to be a sort of unspoken revenge for using our only boat. As I went under, I saw that my thrashing had stirred up a huge cloud of silt, darkening the already foggy water. There was a graininess to everything. A blizzard of little black flecks kicked off the lake floor. For a split second, I could see something like a crayfish flitting away through the cloud of dust, scared off by the commotion I was making. After my moment beneath, I launched myself up and splashed Owen thoroughly, according to plan. Stupid, he said. Yeah, I agreed. Once I got to shore, I started toweling off. Owen caught up about 10 minutes later, but I was still at the shore. For the life of me, though, I couldn't shake the water out of my right ear. I must have looked like a moron after a minute or two, swinging my head downwards, trying to get rid of the warm, sloshy filter over my hearing. Owen let me know as much. You look like a doofus. Yeah, well, you must be an expert. As we continued to heckle each other, I abandoned trying to get the water out of my ear. I tolerated the minor discomfort for what must have been the rest of the night, despite a few more attempts afterwards. All I know is that when I woke up the next morning, the water was gone. The rest of the trip was fun in a mundane way that isn't worth recounting. But the plane ride back is when the first real problem began. As the plane began taking off, I felt my ears pop from the pressure change. Then there was a faint tingle. No, tickle. Using my pinky, I attempted a quick and dignified scratch to my right ear so as not to offend the person sitting next to me. It didn't really do the trick. Deciding to kill two birds with one stone, I put my headphones in to try to get the itch and start my airplane podcasts. Sure enough, after a minute or two, the irritation went away. But not entirely. There was the tiniest tickle still there, just under the murk. School swallowed me back up upon my return, which kept my days full. Life went back to the tedium I'd secretly longed for, much to my dismay. But not everything was the same. Always there was the itch, buried deep in my right ear canal. Throughout the day, I'd have to jam my finger in there, rubbing vigorously in hopes that I could jimmy the source of the irritation. Each time, I'd just barely fail to do the trick. Once, I had to excuse myself from the undergraduate class I was teaching, stepping out to claw at the inside of my ear, scratching hard enough to turn the sensation back into a dull ache. I lifted my eyes to see a pair of students at the end of the hall that had just watched my manic display. They quickly darted away. I decided to pick up my eardrops on the way home. And a box of Q-tips for good measure. A few days later, during office hours, I was still picking at my ear, almost subconsciously by then. My convenience store treatments hadn't done a thing. It was becoming red and raw inside from all of my attempts. Whatever approximation of relief I had been getting from my itching was yielding diminishing returns. My faculty advisor, who had been walking past my open door, stopped. Derek, how's it going? A wave of embarrassment washed over me. Oh, it's all going. Got another half hour left. I'd sidelined the itch in my ear as a problem that'd go away on its own. Are you feeling all right? I've noticed you... He paused, looking for the right words. It seems like your ear is bothering you there. I hadn't been subtle about my affliction, obviously, since my advisor hadn't made a habit of nosing into my business before. Word must have gotten around. Humiliating. Avoiding his eyes, I cast mine down towards my papers for a moment. My heart leapt into my throat. My right pinky, the one I'd just been scratching with, blood covered the tip. He continued. Have you tried drops? My kids used to get earaches all the time. It worked really well. Clenching my bloodied finger tight in my fist, I nodded. Oh, no, I'll have to try that, thanks. I labored through the conversation for another minute or two, desperate for him to leave. Once he finally did, I closed office hours early and decided I'd go to urgent care right away. Speeding home, I tried to stop myself from touching my ear, afraid I'd hurt myself more. I couldn't. The itch was bright white flame. It was impossible to think about anything else. Each time, all I got from my efforts was a little more blood and the unchanging, maddening feeling. Have you ever had an itch that felt like it was actually inside the palm of your hand, just under the stuff you could actually reach? The kind that made you wish you could just peel back your skin and get at the meat in there? That had taken root in my head. Words cannot convey how scared I had become, how little I could focus on anything else. I barged through my apartment door on the cusp of delirium. Why hadn't I just gone straight to the doctor? That's right, I needed my insurance information. Stopping to catch my breath, I realized that with each thud of my heart, the inflamed itch in my ear would rise. What in the world is happening? Unable to stop myself, I dug my finger into my ear again, pressing deep, desperate for any release. What I felt next should have made me scream, had I been able to understand it. Past my sticky blood, my finger could feel something else. A needle-like, sharp point. It came from deeper within my ear cavity, past where I could reach. In my disbelief, I wiggled it gently. With a twitch, it receded. It was hard to tell if I was hearing or feeling the accompanying crackle. Horror doesn't begin to describe it. What do you do at that moment? That's a genuine question. Ask yourself what you would do. My first thought was that I needed to find a gun and blow whatever this was out of my head. But since I didn't own a gun, I immediately made to leave. Nothing else mattered. I just needed to get to a hospital. I made it 2 steps back towards the door. Like a wave, I was suddenly crushed beneath the rabid itch in my ear. All at once, it was a roiling agony, sending me to my knees. There was no torture devised by man quite like this. On pure instinct, like an animal with a limb caught in a trap, I began to thrash my head back and forth. As I did, I slowly became aware of a new sensation that I, and possibly no other person, had ever felt before. Did you know that the inside of your skull has texture? It's a subtle thing. Still, I could feel a barbed tip dragging along the inside of my head, softly catching as it went. Piercing hot pain and nauseating pleasure, hand in hand. Finally, the itch I had been trying to scratch. The kind that doesn't just itch the area in question, but traveled along your nervous system and can be felt in the small of your back or in your soft palate. A life-saving relief. But it didn't stay there. One moment it was there, the next gone. That feeling would only come as long as my head was turned in one particular direction. Once I had singled it out, I tried to lock on that angle. Yet even then, the scratch began vanishing after only a few blissful seconds, slipping away from me. I lunged forward, nearly screaming for it to come back. And then I discovered that it wasn't just looking, but moving in that direction that would bring me release. I kept stumbling forward against my own will, led on by the promise of a few more seconds of mercy. I lumbered onward, out of my apartment, out of the complex. Night had fallen by then, and the scratching in my head was urging me into the woods beyond the parking lot. I was a ride along in my own body, powerless to do anything but pursue escape from that stupid itching in my ear. Nearly blind, my feet tripped and twisted over the dark forest floor. Warm, vicious fluid was pouring out of my ear, coursing down my neck and all over my jacket. It wasn't the right consistency to be blood. Dear Lord, what is happening to me? I'm sure I walked through the forest well into the night, but all I remembered was eventually stumbling out into a huge clearing. No, not a clearing. With my good ear, I could hear the sound of water quietly lapping the shore. A lake. There was a thick pop somewhere in the back of my neck. All tension left me, and I fell to the ground limp as a corpse. A puppet with strings cut. That's when the hatching began. It slithered in my head, struggling against the tension of the tight spaces it was forcing itself through. Black talons gently scraping a chalkboard. I'm thankful that there are less nerves inside of you than outside, because I'm certain the agony would have killed me. Slow and steady, like a crab molt. I felt something push itself out of my right ear. Wedging, grinding, and then, with a stomach-churning suction sound, releasing. Gingerly pressing down on my head to lift itself up were its legs. Black, chitinous legs ending in razor points. I still bear tiny pinprick scars on each spot it stepped as it scuttled across my face. Unconsciousness took me as I saw it skitter forward and disappear into the waves, darker than the night surrounding it. Waking up that next morning, covered in mud and crusty black fluid, I did manage to haul myself back home and then to the doctor. There, a new, strange problem arose, and not from a diagnosis. Something stopped me from telling them the whole story. All I could muster was that I'd been having ear problems lately. After the examination, I could tell they didn't believe me. It must have been a mess in there. Without knowing more, all they could say for certain was that I was never going to hear out of that ear again. I'm writing this because I think something is still very wrong with me. No matter what, I can't bring myself to speak out loud and tell somebody what happened that night. But that's not the worst of it. I've started to act out of character. Do things that don't feel right. Things that I'd just never do normally. Like earlier today, when I invited some friends to go for a swim this weekend. Thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. A quick shout out to my patrons: Melissa Perez, Lawrence Wallen, Eric Cifuentes, Jesse Hartley, Icy Narrates, Alonzo, Cupcake Hips, William Hartley, Rinku Star, Austin My Love, Mr. Sankofa, Seven Cities Journalist, and Ellie Hutmeyer. As usual, guys, I put a link to charity in the description. I'm going to keep it on the LA fires for a hot minute, but I will include other charities a little bit after. I understand that the fires are now no longer big news, but I would still like for the victims of the fires to receive help rebuilding their lives. And as I have been saying, even if that includes you unsubscribing from my Patreon for a while just so that you have something to donate to them, I highly encourage that and I will not be offended. And as usual, feel free to reach out to me on any social media. Let me know how I can be praying for you, and I am more than happy to do that for you. God bless you guys, and I'll see you in the next video.